Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
A funny memory still makes me smile. Growing up in an Asian American family meant lots of care and high expectations, especially when it came to health. I'd stuck with the same pediatrician since I was a baby, but turning 21 meant finding a new doctor. Easy task? Not quite. It wasn't an easy decision to leave my pediatrician's office. She had known me my whole life and understood all my medical history, including my family's genetic predispositions and cultural practices that sometimes influenced our healthcare choices. But it was time to move on. I called the medical center where I usually went for other treatments, hoping to find someone who would be as understanding and thorough as my pediatrician. When the receptionist answered, I explained that I was looking for a new primary care physician since I had aged out of my pediatrician's care. She responded cheerfully and professionally, which made me feel optimistic about finding a good match. The receptionist told me they had two doctors accepting new patients. She explained that Dr. A was in the office Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, while Dr. B worked Tuesdays and Thursdays. I checked my work schedule, which was pretty packed on Tuesdays and Thursdays due to my new job at a local tech company. I told her Dr. A's schedule worked better for me and asked for an appointment. The receptionist agreed, but then added that it was probably for the better anyway. There was something in her tone that made me pause. It wasn't her usual professional voice anymore. It had shifted to something more personal, conspiratorial. When I asked what she meant by that, she lowered her voice, almost whispering into the phone, and told me that Dr. B was Asian, as if that explained everything. My brain short-circuited for a moment. Did she really just say that? In 2025, I grew up hearing these kinds of comments, but I never expected them from a medical professional's office. I responded by telling her that I was Asian too. The line went so quiet I had to check if the call was still connected. I broke the silence by saying that Dr. B actually sounded great. The receptionist started stammering, trying to explain that the doctor had quite a strong accent. I cheerfully told her that wouldn't be a problem, explaining how I grew up with my mom and aunt's accents and was very good at understanding them. I added that it would actually be really nice to have a doctor who understood my cultural background, and insisted that Dr. B sounded perfect. The receptionist kept stammering, trying to remind me about my schedule conflict, but I insisted on scheduling with Dr. B, saying I would make it work. After a few more awkward moments, she finally made the appointment, and I thanked her warmly, making sure to sound extra cheerful. The next day, I called the medical center again and asked to speak with the office manager. I explained the entire interaction and how inappropriate it was for their receptionist to discourage patients from seeing a doctor based on their ethnicity. The manager was mortified and assured me they would address this immediately. A week later, I received a call from the medical center. The manager told me that they had investigated the incident and taken appropriate action. They also offered to help me find a different primary care physician whose schedule would actually work with mine. While I never ended up seeing Dr. B due to the scheduling conflict, I did receive a handwritten note from her a few days later. She thanked me for standing up against discrimination and shared that other patients had previously canceled appointments after speaking with that particular receptionist, but no one had reported it. The receptionist was ultimately transferred to a position with no patient contact. I found out later that she had been directing most Asian patients away from Dr. B for months, affecting both the doctor's practice and potentially the quality of care those patients received. I may not have gotten a new doctor that day, but I did get something better: the satisfaction of knowing that one less person would face discrimination when seeking medical care at that office. I inherited my grandfather's property in California about 5 years ago. It's a beautiful 5-acre plot with a modest house that sits right at the edge of what used to be a quiet neighborhood. My grandfather was a forest ranger who spent 40 years of his life protecting these lands, and this property meant everything to him. When he passed away, I left my apartment in the city and moved here to honor his memory and maintain his legacy. The property came with what I thought was a decent neighbor until she showed her true colors. This woman, who I'll call Karen, moved in next door about 2 years ago. From day one, she complained about everything, from the height of my trees to the fact that I wouldn't let her use my private road as a shortcut to the main street. When the wildfires started getting bad in the area a few months ago, I had to temporarily evacuate. I stayed with my cousin for about 2 weeks until it was safe to return. The fires hadn't reached our properties, thank God, but the aftermath was visible everywhere. Scorched earth just a mile away, and the air still thick with the smell of smoke. The day after I returned, I noticed something strange. There were survey markers on my land about 50 feet into my property line. I thought it was a mistake until I saw Karen directing some workers to start clearing that area. When I confronted her about what she was doing on my property, she casually mentioned that I had come back. She then had the nerve to claim that since I had abandoned my property during the fires, the land was now available for development. I explained that's not how property ownership works, and that I had evacuated for safety reasons. She smugly told me that she had already filed the paperwork to expand her property, claiming that with all the chaos from the fires, it was first come, first served, and I wasn't there to protect it. I demanded that she remove the markers and stop her workers immediately. She just sneered and asked what I was going to do about it, saying the authorities were too busy dealing with fire aftermath to care about my petty complaints. I immediately called the police, but Karen was partly right. They were overwhelmed with fire-related emergencies and told me this was a civil matter that needed to go through proper channels. But I wasn't about to let her steal my grandfather's land. I started documenting everything. I set up security cameras, took photos of the survey markers, and recorded every interaction. I also discovered she hadn't filed any legitimate paperwork. She had just made that up to intimidate me. The next day, she had her workers start cutting down some of my trees. When I told her to stop and threatened to call the police again, she just laughed and said that by the time they got there, the trees would be gone and I couldn't prove they were mine. That's where she made her big mistake. My grandfather had meticulously documented every tree on the property, complete with photographs and GPS coordinates. I also had recent satellite images showing the property boundaries. I contacted my lawyer immediately. Then I got creative. I used the property pins and documents from the county assessor's office to mark the actual property line with bright orange paint and put up no trespassing signs every 10 feet. I also installed floodlights that would activate whenever someone crossed onto my property. Karen demanded that I take down these ugly signs, claiming they were decreasing her property value. I told her that the signs were on my property and they were staying, just like those trees she cut down were on my property. She tried to justify herself by claiming the trees were a hazard and that she had done me a favor. I coldly told her that this favor was going to cost her about $50,000 per tree, according to state law. The color drained from her face when my lawyer sent her the certified letter detailing the damages. 3 mature oak trees at $50,000 each, property damage from her workers, attempted land theft, and harassment. The total came to over $200,000. She started panicking, saying I couldn't do this to her and that she'd lose her house. I simply reminded her that she should have thought about that before trying to steal my land. She tried to backpedal, offering to return the land she never owned in the first place, but it was too late. My lawyer was ruthless, and we had all the evidence we needed. The judge was particularly interested in how she had tried to use the wildfire crisis to her advantage. In the end, she had to sell her house to pay the damages. I bought it through a property management company, and now I'm renting it to a lovely elderly couple who appreciate the quiet neighborhood. I used some of the money from the settlement to create a small memorial garden for my grandfather, right where Karen had tried to steal the land. Every time I look at it, I think about how he would have handled this situation, probably with less patience than I did. A month after Karen moved out, I was surprised to get a call from my lawyer. Apparently, Karen had tried to sue the property management company, claiming she should have the first right to rent her old house. She didn't know I owned it And when my lawyer told the court that I was the new owner, she had a complete meltdown in front of the judge. She started ranting about how I had orchestrated everything to steal her home, completely forgetting that this whole mess started with her trying to steal my land. The judge was not amused. He not only dismissed her case but also ordered her to pay all legal fees. She moved to another state, telling everyone who would listen that she was the victim of a vast conspiracy. The elderly couple renting the house told me they ran into her once at a local supermarket when she was in town visiting someone. She apparently took one look at them, turned her shopping cart around, and speed walked to the exit, leaving all her groceries behind. The memorial garden has flourished beautifully over the past year. I planted 3 young oak trees to replace the ones Karen had cut down, and my grandfather's favorite wildflowers bloom all around them. Sometimes the elderly couple comes over for coffee, and we sit in the garden sharing stories about the neighborhood. They enjoy hearing about my grandfather's time as a forest ranger, and they help me tend to the new trees. It's exactly the kind of peaceful resolution my grandfather would have appreciated. I didn't expect to deal with so much bureaucracy in my senior year of high school in the 90s. I was a good student, kept my grades up, and taught martial arts. By junior year, I had enough credits to graduate early, but I stayed to finish with my friends. Since I had the flexibility, I loaded up my schedule with courses that interested me and would look good on college applications. I took Advanced Placement United States Government, Advanced Placement Physics, Advanced Placement Anatomy and Physiology, and some electives like jewelry making. The advanced placement courses were demanding, and since I already had strong test scores from junior year, I decided to drop physics, government, and jewelry to maintain my GPA. This left me with 3 gloriously free periods around lunchtime. I didn't think much of it in previous years. Dropped classes just meant free periods. Both my parents worked full-time, so none of us realized anything was wrong until we discovered our broken answering machine was the reason we'd missed some important calls. Apparently, the school administrator had been calling 3 times every day to report my unexcused absences from a study hall I'd been automatically assigned to after dropping those classes. No one at school said a word to me about it, and no letters were sent home. But those messages, they got nastier by the day. When my mom started her semi-retirement as a hairstylist, working alternate weeks, she finally began catching these calls. She tried to resolve it simply by explaining to the administrator that my grades were excellent and that I could have technically graduated already. She also mentioned that since all college applications were already submitted, she didn't see any issue with the situation. The administrator's response was shocking. She went on a tirade about how irresponsible my parents were being and threatened to personally contact every college I'd applied to. She ranted about how unacceptable my behavior was and questioned how it reflected on both me and my parents as guardians. The administrator wouldn't stop calling even after my parents repeatedly called back and even showed up in person to address the situation. She insisted it was the law to report unapproved truancy, demanding written permission with ridiculous stipulations. She wanted my parents to sign a document admitting they were knowingly compromising my education and essentially confessing to being negligent parents. That's when my mom had her brilliant idea. She discovered that yes, schools were legally required to notify parents of unexcused absences. So she decided to play along, maliciously. Every time the administrator called about a missed period, my mom would put on an award-worthy performance. When informed of my absence, she would hesitate and ponder out loud, taking her time to consider the situation. She would eventually grant permission for that specific absence but would insist that she needed to be called about any future ones, as she'd need to think very carefully about those cases too. When the administrator pointed out that I was missing multiple periods every day, my mom simply explained that she needed to be called about each one individually, as she couldn't possibly make blanket statements about allowing absences. She insisted on considering each period separately, much to the administrator's growing frustration. This went on for 5 months, 3 calls a day, with my mom taking her sweet time considering each absence. knowing full well I'd be missing those periods again the next day. The administrator grew increasingly frustrated but couldn't stop calling without violating the notification policy she'd been so insistent about following. The calls finally stopped about a month before graduation. The administrator had requested a transfer to a different school district for the following year, citing stress-related concerns. I guess some people can't handle getting a taste of their own bureaucratic medicine. My mom still considers it one of her finest performances. After 15 years in retail management, I thought nothing could surprise me. But this incident at a convenience store in suburban Boston still leaves me shaking my head. I started working there right after getting laid off from my previous retail job during the 2008 recession. It wasn't my dream job, but I worked my way up from cashier to assistant manager within a year, and then to store manager 6 months later. The pay was decent, and most of our customers were friendly suburban folks, just going about their day. But there was this one regular customer, let's call her Karen, who made everyone's blood pressure rise whenever she walked in. You know the type, always complaining about prices, arguing about expired coupons, and insisting items were mismarked even though they weren't. She'd been banned from at least 2 other stores in the area, which should tell you everything you need to know about her. One quiet Tuesday afternoon, Karen burst through our doors and made a beeline for the ATM. I was in the back office doing paperwork when my associate radioed me about a situation up front. From past experience, I knew exactly who was causing trouble. When I got to the front, Karen was waving around a handful of ATM receipts like they were winning lottery tickets. She was yelling at my associate, complaining that the machine was broken because she'd been trying to get money out for the past 10 minutes and it was only giving her pieces of paper. My associate had already explained that the transaction was being declined by her bank, but Karen wouldn't listen and demanded to speak to whoever was in charge. I introduced myself as a store manager, and Karen immediately perked up, thinking she'd finally found someone who would help her. She complained about the ATM being broken and not giving her money, shoving the receipts in my face. I could clearly see transaction declined. NSF printed at the bottom of each one. While I was looking at them, she decided to try another transaction. Sure enough, another receipt printed with the same message. I explained to her that NSF means insufficient funds and assured her the ATM was working fine, but her bank was declining the transactions because there wasn't enough money in her account. Karen adamantly denied this, insisting she knew exactly how much money she had. When I told her she needed to contact her bank directly about any errors since we don't have control over ATM transactions, she got even more agitated. She argued that she shouldn't have to call her bank and just wanted her $100, complaining about our terrible customer service. I tried to be understanding while explaining again that we really couldn't do anything about this since the ATM was operated by a separate company. That's when she made her most ridiculous demand yet. She wanted us to give her the money from our register instead. I told her that was absolutely against company policy and illegal. Karen then tried to guilt-trip me, bringing up how she'd been shopping here for years and couldn't believe we'd treat a loyal customer this way. I had to repeat that whether she could withdraw money or not was entirely between her and her bank, and we could not give her money from our register. She responded by stomping her foot like a toddler and declaring that I was completely unhelpful. As she stormed out, she threatened to call corporate about this incident, knocking over a display of chips without even looking back. The next day, I found out she actually did call corporate. My district manager called me laughing. Apparently, Karen had demanded I be fired for refusing to help a customer in need and denying access to her own money. She even claimed I was discriminating against her because she was a valued customer. She was now officially banned from all our stores in the greater Boston area. She tried the same act at a gas station down the street, but their manager had already been warned about her. They kicked her out before she could even reach their ATM. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.